The time was 2 a.m. when Lena Reyes made the worst decision of her life. She told herself it would only be a minute. Just 1 minute to close her eyes, to let the burning leave her legs and the ringing stop in her ears. She had been awake for 22 hours. She had 3 jobs. She had a grandmother lying in a hospital bed with machines counting every breath. 1 minute, she thought. Nobody would even notice. She was wrong about that. Very wrong. The chair was soft. The restaurant was quiet. Lena Reyes, 26 years old, 5'4", with dark circles under her eyes so deep they looked painted on, sat down in the corner booth of La Volta, the most exclusive private dining room in the city, put her head on her folded arms and fell sound asleep. She did not know that the man who owned La Volta had never once let a single staff member sit down during working hours. She did not know that he catalogued every object in his restaurant by position, by angle, by level of cleanliness. She did not know that the chair she was sleeping in had been placed at a precise distance of 14 inches from the table, and that her body had shifted it a full 3 inches to the left. She did not know any of that. She was asleep. The private elevator opened at exactly 3 o'clock. Adrian Varelli stepped out into his restaurant the way a man steps into a room he built with his own hands, which he had in every way that mattered. He was 34 years old, 6'2", and dressed in a dark gray suit that sat perfectly across his shoulders even at 2 in the morning. His dark hair was brushed back. His jaw was set. His eyes swept the room the way a surgeon's eyes sweep a tray of instruments, checking, cataloging, measuring. The lights came on in sequence. He preferred that. One panel, then the next, then the next. Never all at once. All at once was chaos. Adrian Varelli did not do chaos. He moved through his restaurant with the slow, deliberate calm of a man who had never once rushed anywhere, because he had never once needed to. People waited for him. Events arranged themselves around him. The world, as far as Adrian Varelli was concerned, operated at whatever speed he set. He had spent 15 years and a considerable body count making sure that was true. He had earned his reputation the hard way, through patience, precision, and a ruthlessness so absolute that men twice his size went quiet when his name came up in conversation. He ran 3 legitimate businesses and several that were not, and he ran all of them with the same iron attention to detail. A misplaced decimal in the books. A waiter who breathed too loud. A glass left with a fingerprint on the rim. These things did not happen in his world without consequence. He was almost at the kitchen when he saw her. He stopped. She was sitting in booth 7. His booth, the one he sat in when he ate alone, which was always, with her cheek resting on her arms and her dark hair fanned out across the table. One of her shoes had slipped slightly off her heel. Her breathing was soft and slow and completely, utterly peaceful. Adrian did not move for a long moment. A lesser man would have shouted. A crueler man would have thrown something. Adrian did neither. He stood very still, watching her breathe, and something happened in his chest that he had no name for. He had fired a man last month for leaving a coffee ring on the counter. He had ended a business partnership over a crooked picture frame. He had never, not once in his adult life, allowed a disruption in his space to go unaddressed. But he stood there watching her sleep, and the seconds stretched out and he did not move. Then quietly, so quietly that the 2 bodyguards at the elevator had to lean forward to hear him, he said, "Wake her. I want her awake when she understands what she's done." Lena came back to consciousness through layers of fog. First she heard something. A sound. Sharp, rhythmic. Something tapping her arm. She thought it was her alarm. She groaned. She tried to pull away from it. Then the tapping stopped and a voice said very quietly, "Mississippi." She opened her eyes. For 1 full second everything was fine. She saw the ceiling of the restaurant, the low golden light, the clean lines of the booths. Then she remembered where she was. Then she turned her head. He was standing over her. He was tall. She hadn't realized how tall until this moment. And he was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on a person's face before. It wasn't rage. It was colder than rage. It was the look of a man doing a precise calculation and not yet announcing the result. Lena sat up so fast she knocked her elbow on the table. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice came out wrecked, still half asleep, which made it worse. "I'm so sorry, I was just, It was only for a second, I swear I didn't mean. Stop talking, he said. She stopped. He studied her the way a jeweler studies a stone. Methodically. Clinically. His eyes moved from her face to her hands to the chair, which he looked at for a long moment in a way that made her feel inexplicably that the chair was the part he was most upset about. Your name, he said. Lena. Lena Reyes. I work the late shift. I've worked here for 3 months. I've never. Lena Reyes. He said her name like he was entering it into a file. Do you know who I am? She did. Everyone who worked at La Volta knew who Adrian Varelli was. The manager had told them on the first day, in a voice that suggested she was not so much giving information as issuing a warning. She nodded. Good, he said. Then you understand how serious this is. He walked to the nearest table, not hers, a different one that was empty and clean and at the correct angle, and set down the small leather folder he was carrying. He did not sit. He stood with his hands clasped in front of him, and he began to speak in the quiet, unhurried tone of a man reading from a list. You fell asleep on duty. In a private dining space that is not a staff area. In a booth that is designated for the owner's personal use. You disrupted the order of this establishment. You violated 3 separate staff protocols. He paused. Are you aware of these violations? Yes, she said. I know. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. That's correct, he said. It won't. Because you will not be here for it to happen again. He looked at her steadily. You're terminated. The word landed like a stone dropping into water. Lena felt it ripple out through her whole body. Or, he said, and the word was so unexpected that she flinched at it, you work additional hours. Without supplemental pay. As a consequence for what you've done. Every night for the next 2 weeks. Whatever requires doing. Cooking. Cleaning. Whatever I need. He picked up his folder. You choose. She stared at him. Those are my only options? Yes. That's not a choice. That's a trap. Something crossed his face. It was very brief and very hard to read, but it was there. Yes, he said. It is. She should have walked out. She knew that. She had replayed this moment 10,000 times in the weeks that followed, and every time she thought, I should have just walked out. Found another job. Found a way. But the truth was there was no other way, and some part of her already knew it, and that was what made what came next happen the way it did. Please, she said. He turned to look at her. I can't lose this job. She hated how her voice sounded. She hated how her hands were trembling. She had learned a long time ago that showing weakness to powerful people was the same as handing them a weapon, but she was so tired and there was nothing left to hide behind. My grandmother is in the hospital. They're saying she needs surgery. Costs more than I make in 6 months. I'm working 3 jobs to try to. I'm the only person she has. If I lose this job, I don't know how. She stopped. Pressed her lips together. Looked down at her hands. Adrian Varelli looked at her for a long moment. His face gave away nothing. He was so still he might have been carved from something. That is not my concern, he said. And then he reached for his phone. She moved before she thought about it. Her hand shot out and closed around his wrist. They both went absolutely still. She felt it the instant she touched him. A current, low and electric, running from her palm up through her arm and into her chest. Like touching a live wire and finding impossibly that it didn't burn you. He had no idea what it was. He had never felt anything like it. Neither, it seemed, had he. Adrian Varelli was a man who did not allow touch. This was known. Not discussed. In his world, things like this were never discussed openly, but known. Known the way dangerous information is always known. Quietly, carefully, and with great respect for the consequences of forgetting it. He didn't shake hands. He didn't do embraces. At company events he stood slightly apart from everyone else, and nobody stood close enough to test him. His aversion to contact was absolute, and everyone who worked near him understood that it was not a preference. It was a rule. He should have pulled away immediately. He should have had her removed from the building. He should have done 100 things that a man with his history and his habits would automatically do when someone touched him without permission. He did none of them. longer than he could calculate. Something that was not revulsion. Not contamination. Not the familiar clawing need to pull back and scrub and restore order. He felt something that was almost disturbingly the opposite of all those things. He felt still. Like a compass finding north. It lasted 3 seconds. Then he stepped back smoothly and Lena's hand fell to her side. She was staring at him. He didn't know what his face looked like and he didn't want to. 2 weeks, he said after a moment. His voice was different. Just slightly. 12 hours a day. Starting tomorrow. He left before she could answer. Lena accepted the terms the way a person accepts a sentence, with no real belief that it was fair and no real ability to fight it. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself 2 weeks was nothing. She told herself she had survived worse. She was right about the last part at least. She showed up the next evening at 5 p.m. as instructed. She cooked. She cleaned. She managed the kitchen inventory and reorganized the supply room according to a diagram that Adrian had left on the counter with every item labeled by category, subcategory, and expiration range. She did it without complaint because complaining required energy she didn't have. Adrian appeared twice that evening. Both times he walked through the space she had just cleaned, inspected it without comment and left. The second time she caught him rearranging 3 jars on the shelf that she had placed with their labels facing perfectly forward. He turned them 2 degrees, just 2 degrees, so they were at an angle she couldn't measure and he apparently could. She stared at his back and thought, this man is going to make me lose my mind. She went home at 11 p.m., slept for 5 hours, worked her morning shift at the diner, her afternoon shift at the laundry, and returned to La Volta the following evening. This was her life. This was the shape of things. She was 3 days into this rhythm when her phone rang during the supply room reorganization. It was the hospital. Her grandmother's name was Rosa Reyes and she was 71 years old and she was the only person in the world who had ever loved Lena the way a person needs to be loved. Completely, without conditions, without keeping score. Rosa had raised her after her parents were gone, had worked 2 jobs herself to keep the lights on and the refrigerator full, had sat up with her through fevers and bad dreams and the particular misery of being 17 and lost. She was small and sharp-tongued and funny and she made the best rice and beans Lena had ever eaten. And now she was lying in a hospital bed with her heart doing things hearts were not supposed to do. The doctor said surgery. The surgery cost $10,000 up front before they would schedule the operating room. Lena had 48 hours. She stood in the supply room of La Volta with her phone pressed to her ear and tried to do the math in her head, and the math did not work no matter how she arranged it. She had $800 saved. She had a credit limit of $2,000. Her 3 jobs combined paid just enough to cover rent, food, and the basic hospital fees she was already managing. She was short by $7,200 and she had 48 hours and her grandmother's heart was not doing well. She found Adrian in his office. She had never been in his office before. It was exactly what she would have expected. Clean to the point of sterility, every surface bare, a single framed photograph on the wall that she didn't have time to look at. He was at his desk. He looked up when she came in and something in his expression shifted slightly, the way still water shifts when you drop something into it. I need a salary advance, she said. She didn't sit down. She stood in the doorway with her hands at her sides. And she said it straight because there was no other way to say it. My grandmother needs surgery. I'm short. I know it's not standard, I know you have no reason to, but I'm asking. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, how much? She told him. He didn't blink. He pulled out his phone and made 2 calls, one after the other, quiet and brief. Then he put the phone down and said, it will be arranged. The relief was so strong it almost knocked her over. Thank you, she said. I'll pay it back. Every cent. Yes, he said. You will. He picked up a pen. But not through salary. The debt is separate. And the terms are different. She should have asked what the terms were before she agreed. He would always know that. But he had just saved her grandmother's life, and she was standing in his office at 10 o'clock at night with 7 hours of work behind her and 48 hours of terror ahead, and she said, okay. That was the moment the trap closed. The terms were simple and absolute. She would leave her other jobs. She would move into Adrian Varelli's penthouse. She would work for him privately, cooking, managing, running his household, until the debt was paid. The salary he assigned her was generous enough that she could manage just on paper. In practice it meant she owed him $10,000 on a schedule that would take months. And in those months she would be in his home, in his world, under his rules, with no exit clause and no room to negotiate. She lay awake the night before she was supposed to move in and stared at the ceiling and thought about what she had agreed to. She thought about her grandmother, who was now scheduled for surgery at 7 a.m. on Thursday and who would be fine, the doctor said, who would come through it and recover and be sharp-tongued and funny again. She thought about Adrian's face when she'd grabbed his wrist. That stillness. That thing she couldn't name. She packed her 2 bags in the morning and showed up at the address he had given her. The penthouse was on the 32nd floor of a building that had no name on the outside, just a number, as if it was too exclusive even for branding. The elevator required a key card. The lobby required a second one. And the apartment itself. Lena stepped through the front door and stood still for a moment and just looked. It was the most ordered space she had ever seen in her life. Not cold, exactly. There was warmth in the materials, dark wood, warm stone, good light, but controlled in a way that went beyond decoration. Every object had a place. Every surface had a purpose. The books on the shelves were arranged by height and then by color within each height tier. The kitchen had labels on every drawer and cabinet. The living room furniture was arranged with a geometric precision that she could feel even before she started measuring things. And she knew somehow that she would eventually measure things, because she would have to know exactly how far she was allowed to deviate before he noticed. A household manager named Carla showed her around with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times. She explained the schedule. Lena received a printed copy. It was color-coded. "This is for every day?" Lena said. "Every day," Carla confirmed, and handed her a second sheet with the kitchen specifications and a third with the cleaning protocols. Lena looked down at the 3 sheets of paper and thought, this man is going to reorganize my entire nervous system. The first week was an education in what precision actually meant. She learned that the coffee had to be brewed at a specific temperature, measured with a thermometer he kept in the second drawer on the left. She learned that the dinner plates had to be warmed before they were plated and then cooled to exactly the right temperature before they were set on the table. She learned that the kitchen counters had to be wiped in a specific direction. Left to right, always left to right, never in circles. Because circles left invisible patterns he could apparently sense through some extra faculty she did not possess. She burned the first dinner. Not badly, just slightly, just the bottom of the sauce in the pan, and she scraped it off and replated and hoped. He ate 2 bites, set down his fork and looked at the dish. "The sauce is scorched," he said. "Do it again." She opened her mouth to argue. It was 11 at night and she had been on her feet since 8 in the morning, and then she looked at his face and closed it again. She went back to the kitchen and made the sauce again. It was perfect the second time. She brought it out and he ate it without comment, which she was beginning to understand was the highest compliment he gave. She did not get fired. This struck her eventually as strange. She made mistakes every day, small ones, almost invisible ones, and every time he found them, named them, required correction. But he never once suggested she was done. He never once looked at her the way he looked at the burned sauce, with the flat finality of something that was simply not going to work. He kept her. He didn't know why. She thought about it at night, in the small room he'd given her that was perfectly clean and perfectly silent and not, despite all of that, actually uncomfortable. She thought about it and came up with no answer that made sense. She noticed the shift around the middle of the second week. It was not dramatic. Adrian Varelli did not do dramatic. But there were small things. She would be at the counter cutting vegetables, and she would become aware, without looking, that he had stopped moving somewhere behind her. That he was standing still in a way that had nothing to do with inspecting the kitchen. That he was watching her. Once she turned around and caught him. He moved immediately, picked up a folder from the counter, flipped it open, walked away. But he had not been reading anything in that folder because the folder was upside down. She did not say anything about the folder. She noticed that his corrections became less frequent. Not absent, he still found every flaw, still named every deviation, but the silence between them had changed. It was less like the silence of a man cataloging failures and more like the silence of a man who was not entirely sure what he was doing, and who was not used to that feeling. He was not softer. He was still precise, still demanding, still capable of turning a whole evening rigid with a single look. But there were moments, brief, almost invisible, when he would pause near her for a half-second longer than necessary. When his voice would drop half a register when he spoke to her in the kitchen. When she caught him twice watching her eat the small meal she allowed herself at the end of the night, with an expression she could not fully decode but that made something in her chest do something inconvenient. She told herself she was imagining it. He was not imagining it. The strangest thing was the approaching and the stopping. He would cross the room toward her. She was always aware of him crossing rooms, because everything in the penthouse was so precisely arranged that any movement registered. And then 3 or 4 feet away he would stop. Change direction. Find something else to look at, touch, attend to. It happened so regularly that she started tracking it without meaning to, and once she started tracking it she couldn't stop. He wanted to come closer. Something was stopping him. She did not know what exactly, but she had enough life experience to recognize the shape of someone fighting themselves. "Mr. Varelli," she said one evening while she was at the sink and he was standing 3 feet to her left doing his approach and stop maneuver for the 4th time in 1 hour. "Is there something you actually need, or are you just going to keep walking toward me and then not?" The silence that followed was extraordinary. "The storage shelf," he said after a moment. "The second shelf needs adjusting." "The second shelf is fine," she said. "I measured it this morning." Another silence. "Yes," he said. "It is." And he walked away. She turned back to the sink and allowed herself very briefly to smile. She found him at his desk at 9:30 on a Thursday evening, staring at his computer with the particular rigid stillness of a man who would rather set the machine on fire than admit he needed help with it. She had come in to deliver his evening coffee, exactly the right temperature. She had stopped using the thermometer because she could feel it now. And she set it down and looked at the screen and saw the financial management software he was fighting with. "I used that system at my second job," she said. "The permissions settings are in a different place than they show in the manual." He looked at her. Something passed across his face. "Show me," he said. He came around the side of the desk. It was a small desk. Not in dimensions, it was actually very large, but in terms of the space between her and him when she leaned in to reach the keyboard. He had to get close. She got close. And their arms touched. It was brief. Just a brush, the inside of her forearm against his sleeve, and she was already pulling back and correcting the angle when she heard him make a sound that wasn't quite a word. She looked at him. His eyes were closed. Not the closed eyes of someone in pain or someone pulling away. The closed eyes of someone standing in the middle of something and not wanting to move. His jaw was tight. His breathing was measured. He looked, she thought, like a man standing in the rain after a very long drought, deliberately not opening an umbrella. Then he opened his eyes and they were darker than she remembered them being. "Everyone else," he said very quietly, "makes me feel contaminated." He stopped. He seemed surprised by himself. "Like I need to remove whatever they've touched from my skin." He looked at his arm where she had brushed it. "You don't do that." She didn't know what to say. She stayed where she was, close but not touching, and let the silence be whatever it needed to be. "It's the first time in a long time." He stopped again. Looked at the screen. "Show me the permissions settings." "Okay," she said softly. And she did. After that, something shifted between them that neither of them named. She started noticing things she hadn't let herself notice before. The way he moved through his own apartment like he was always slightly braced for impact. The way he checked the locks exactly 3 times every single night and she could hear him from her room. 1, 2, 3 and then silence and then one more just in case. The way he arranged his books not just by height and color but she discovered one afternoon, also by the date he'd first read them, the year written in pencil so small on the spine that she'd needed to tilt the lamp to see it. He had a system for everything. A system for his shoes, for his coffee cups, for the temperature of the water when he washed his hands, which happened, she counted once, 11 times in a single morning. And beneath every system was the same thing. A person trying very hard to make the world stay exactly where he'd put it. One afternoon she found him standing in the kitchen with both hands on the counter, breathing in a slow, deliberate pattern, not moving. She set down what she was carrying and stood nearby, not touching, just nearby. "It's getting worse," he said without looking up. She didn't ask what. She already knew. "Today or in general?" He was quiet for a moment. "Both." She leaned against the counter beside him, close enough that she could feel the tension coming off him in waves. "When it gets like this," she said, "what usually helps?" "Control," he said. "Restoring order. Making sure everything is." "What else?" Another pause. "This," he said. And he meant her being there. She knew he meant that. He would not say it directly because saying it directly was a form of exposure he wasn't ready for, but she had learned to read the spaces around his words, and this one was clear. She didn't make a thing of it. He just stayed. It was 3 weeks in when he told her. They had been sitting on the terrace, him in his usual chair, her cross-legged on the outdoor couch he never used, both of them with coffee, the city spread below them like a diagram of itself. He had been quiet for a long time in a way that felt different from his usual silences. Heavier. "I had a brother," he said. She looked at him. "Daniel. He was 4 years younger than me." He set his coffee down. Looked at his hands. "We were close. In the way that, when you're that young and your home is a certain kind of home, you become close out of necessity as much as anything else." He paused. "I was responsible for him. That was understood. Stated explicitly by my father on many occasions." Lena stayed very still. "He died when he was 17. It was an accident. Not something I caused directly. But I was supposed to be there in a certain place at a certain time. And I wasn't." His voice was flat and precise, the way his voice got when something had too much feeling in it to risk any inflection at all. "I've spent 20 years believing that if I had simply been where I was supposed to be, if I had followed the plan, kept to the arrangement, he would be alive." "That's not the same as being responsible," Lena said. "Isn't it?" "No." She leaned forward. "You were 17. You were a kid. Whatever happened wasn't something a 17-year-old was supposed to prevent. I was not an ordinary 17-year-old. That doesn't matter." She was surprised by the strength in her own voice. "You have been punishing yourself for 20 years for something you could not control. And everything," she gestured at the apartment, at the locks, at the invisible diagrams of order that ran through everything he owned, "all of this is about making sure nothing goes wrong again. Because if everything stays in its place, nobody gets hurt." She paused. "But things still go wrong. And people still get hurt. And you still blame yourself. And the systems just keep getting bigger." He looked at her. He looked at her for a long time and she did not look away. "You're very perceptive," he said finally, "for someone who broke my system by sleeping in my restaurant." She laughed. It startled both of them. "That," he said after a moment quietly, "is the first time I've heard you laugh. You haven't given me many reasons." "No," he said, and his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "I suppose I haven't. After that night things were different. Not fixed. Nothing about Adrian Varelli was simple enough to be fixed by one conversation on a terrace. But different. The quality of the air between them changed." He stopped the approach and stop maneuver quite so obviously, though he was still careful, still deliberate. She stopped holding herself at the precise professional distance she'd maintained since the first day. He started talking to her. Not instructions, not corrections, actually talking. He told her, in the dry, precise way that she was starting to find unexpectedly charming, about the businesses he ran, the problems he was managing, the aspects of his world that frustrated him, which turned out to be most of it. She told him about her grandmother, about growing up in a small apartment with a woman who could make something out of nothing and who had a repertoire of proverbs for every occasion. He listened the way he did everything, completely without distraction. One night late they were both in the kitchen. She was finishing the dishes and he had come in for something and then had not left. He was sitting on the counter, which she knew meant something because Adrian Varelli had never once in her memory sat on a surface not designed for sitting, watching her work. "You track her condition," she said without turning. "My grandmother." You've been monitoring her recovery. Pause. How did you know? The doctor uses a patient portal. I saw your login information on the system by accident. She set the last dish on the rack. You could have told me. I wasn't sure you'd want me to. She turned to look at him. He was very still, sitting on the counter with his hands in his lap, and he was watching her with that dark, careful gaze, and he looked, she thought, nothing like a mafia boss and entirely like a person who was very afraid of what the person across from them was about to say. Thank you, she said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he reached out very slowly and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek as he pulled them back. Both of them stayed very still, like they were afraid of breaking something. You should sleep, he said. You're tired. Adrian. It was the first time she'd used his first name. She watched him absorb it. So are you. He didn't have an answer to that. But he didn't argue. Rosa Reyes had been in the hospital for 3 weeks and she was recovering well, and she was, according to every nurse on the ward, the most terrifying 71-year-old they had ever encountered. She had opinions about the food, the lighting, the television programming, and the frequency with which the staff checked her chart. She had apparently reduced one intern to what witnesses described as a quiet despair over the handling of her medication schedule. Adrian came with Lena on a Tuesday. This was remarkable for several reasons, starting with the fact that hospitals were not places Adrian Varelli went to voluntarily. They were full of things he could not control: bacteria, illness, bodily fluids, the compressed suffering of strangers. He had his own doctor, a private one who visited the penthouse, and he had not set foot in a medical facility in over 5 years. He stood in the elevator on the way up and breathed through his nose in the deliberate pattern she recognized, and she thought about saying something and then didn't because he was doing it, and that was enough. Rosa was sitting up in bed when they walked in. She was small and thin, with silver hair pulled back and dark eyes that missed absolutely nothing, and she saw everything she needed to see in the 3 seconds it took Lena and Adrian to walk through the door. So, she said in a voice that was fully recovered and sharp as a blade, you're him. Abuela, Lena started. I wasn't talking to you. Rosa's eyes were fixed on Adrian. Sit down. Both of you. They sat. Rosa studied Adrian with the unnerving directness of someone who had spent 71 years refusing to be intimidated by anything. Adrian, who made grown men rearrange their business plans with a single look, sat in a hospital chair and met her gaze, and Lena would remember this for the rest of her life, did not look away. He held her gaze like he was accepting a judgment. You paid for my surgery, Rosa said. Yes. You paid for it, and then you made my granddaughter come live in your house to pay you back. Yes. So you trapped her. Rosa looked at him for a long moment. At least you're honest about it, she said. That's something. She shifted in the bed, adjusting her position with the careful movements of someone still sore. Tell me why. And don't give me the money excuse. I didn't survive 71 years and a heart operation to be given a financial explanation. Adrian was quiet for long enough that Lena started to speak, to intervene, to manage it, and he put up one hand just slightly and she stopped. He was looking at Rosa. He was doing the thing she had watched him do on the terrace, finding the words from a place he didn't normally go to. I used her situation, he said, because it gave me a way to justify keeping her nearby. He paused. She affects me in a way that nothing else does. I don't have a better explanation than that. I'm aware it was not an ethical approach. Not ethical, Rosa repeated with impressive restraint. You coerced my granddaughter into indentured servitude because you have feelings for her. Yes, he said. When you say it that way it sounds considerably worse. It is considerably worse, Rosa said. It is also, I suspect, the most honest thing you have said to another human being in quite some time. She looked at Lena. Did you know? Lena thought about the approach and stop maneuver. The upside-down folder. The strand of hair. I suspected, she said. Rosa looked back at Adrian. Are you in love with her? Abuela. I'm dying, Rosa said pleasantly. I had heart surgery 3 weeks ago. I'm allowed to ask direct questions. Adrian met Rosa's gaze and said with the same flat precision he used for everything, Yes. The room went very quiet. Lena looked at her hands. Rosa was silent for a moment. Then she said with the tone of a woman delivering a verdict from a bench, "You will release her from the debt. Completely. Today." Adrian nodded. "You will seek professional help for," she gestured at him, "whatever it is that makes you trap women and count their mistakes and reorganize the world to manage your pain. And if my granddaughter chooses to have anything to do with you, which I am not recommending, I want to be clear, I am simply allowing for the possibility. It will be because she wants to. Not because she owes you something. Not because you've arranged it. Because she wants to. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes," Adrian said. Rosa looked at him for one more long moment. Then she said almost to herself, "You went into a hospital for her. You sat in that chair and you breathed through it and you didn't leave." She tilted her head. "There might be something worth working with there." "Abuela," Lena said, "are you seriously considering?" "I'm not considering anything," Rosa said. "I'm old. I'm recovering. I'm advising." She waved her hand. "Now one of you get me the better pudding from the nurse's station. Not the brown one. The vanilla." They were in the elevator going down when Adrian said without looking at her, "The debt is cancelled." Lena looked at the elevator buttons. "I'll arrange the paperwork today. There's no balance. The surgery costs are a gift, not a loan." He paused. "You can leave whenever you want. Tonight if you want." "I won't." He stopped. "I won't make anything difficult for you. Adrian. I also want to say," he started and then stopped again, which was strange because Adrian Varelli never stopped in the middle of sentences. He was too controlled for that. "That I am aware of what I did. The way I structured your situation. I don't want you to think I'm unaware of what that was." The elevator doors opened. They walked out into the lobby and stopped, standing on the marble floor with the city beyond the glass doors in front of them. "Stay," he said. "It was very quiet. If you want. But as a choice. That's all I'm asking." She looked at him. He was standing with his hands at his sides and his jaw set, and he looked, she thought, more vulnerable in this moment than she had ever seen a powerful person look. He had offered her freedom with one hand and asked for something with the other, and he had done it honestly, and she thought, that took everything he had. "I need time," she said. He nodded. "Take it," he said. And meant it. She went back to her old apartment, which smelled like dust and the neighbors cooking and the specific particular quiet of a place that had been waiting. She unpacked her 2 bags. She sat on her bed. She made tea. She called her grandmother every day. Rosa was being discharged in a week. The recovery was going well. She was apparently terrorizing physical therapy. She did not call Adrian. She heard through Carla, who texted her once carefully because Carla was professional but also human, that things in the penthouse were not going well. The episodes were more frequent. He had reorganized the kitchen 3 times in 1 week. He had not slept more than 4 hours on any single night. The systems that had been humming along just barely, while she was there, had started to fray without whatever it was that she brought with her, some counterbalance she hadn't realized she was providing. She told herself it wasn't her responsibility. She believed it. She also knew with a certainty that lived somewhere below her ribs, that she missed him. Not the penthouse, not the salary, not even the structure. She missed him. The careful, precise way he moved through the world. The dark eyes and the upside-down folder. The way he said her name. The way he had sat in a hospital chair breathing through his nose because being there mattered more than the discomfort. She sat with all of that for a week. She let it settle into a shape she could see clearly. Then she called her grandmother. "I already know what you're going to ask me," Rosa said. "The answer is, follow your heart. But set conditions. And make sure one of them is that he talks to someone who knows what they're doing, because love is not a substitute for therapy, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise." "I love you," Lena said. "I know," Rosa said. "Now go fix your situation." She went back on a Friday evening. He opened the door before she knocked, which meant he had seen her in the lobby camera, which she chose not to find unsettling. He looked. She assessed him quickly, the way she had learned to, like someone who had not slept enough and had been fighting himself constantly and had won some of those fights and lost others. He looked frankly like she felt. I have conditions, she said. I know, he said. I haven't told them to you yet. I know, he said again. But whatever they are, the answer is yes. She looked at him. Don't do that. Don't agree to things you haven't heard. That's just a different kind of control. He paused. And then, remarkably, he nodded. Tell me, he said. She told him. Therapy, real therapy, weekly, with a professional who specialized in OCD and trauma. Not someone he hired who would tell him what he wanted to hear. No more using fear or debt or structural dependency to keep people close. A real relationship built out in the open where both of them could leave if they needed to. And honesty, actual honesty, even when it was inconvenient, even when the honest thing was something he didn't want to say. He listened to all of it without interrupting. He stood in his own doorway with his hands at his sides and he listened. Yes, he said when she finished. To all of it. That includes the therapy, she said. I know what it includes. Adrian. I already made an appointment, he said. Last Tuesday. He said it like a man admitting something complicated, which it was. I wasn't certain you were coming back. I did it anyway. She stood there on his doorstep and looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped inside. She set her bag down and turned to him, and he crossed the room to her without stopping. No approach and no halt. He crossed the room and he put his arms around her, and she felt the tension in his whole body, the years of it, the architecture of it, and then slowly his arms tightened and she felt the tension change into something different. Something that was not armor. Something that was just him holding her in his ordered, beautiful apartment that smelled like good coffee and clean linen, with the city outside the windows and the long, strange road that had brought them here spread out behind them. He pressed his face into her hair. She felt him breathe. No revulsion, she said quietly into his shoulder. No contamination. No, he said. His voice was lower than she had ever heard it. None. She pulled back just enough to look at him. His eyes were open. They were very close. His face was, she didn't have a word for it exactly. It was the face of someone who had been braced for impact for a very long time and had finally, very slowly, allowed themselves to unclench. He touched her face with both hands, very carefully, the way he touched things he was certain about. He brushed his thumb across her cheekbone. I'm going to be difficult, he said. I know, she said. I'll probably reorganize the furniture when I'm stressed. I'll find faults in things that don't need fixing. Adrian, she said. What? I know all of that. She looked at him steadily. I also know you sat in a hospital for me. I know you made an appointment you weren't sure you'd need. I know you let me leave. She paused. That's not nothing. No, he said. It's not. So, she said, and she allowed herself to smile. We start. Carefully. With conditions. With conditions, he agreed. And then he kissed her. Carefully. Like everything he did. And she kissed him back like a person who had finally made a decision and meant it completely. What had started in the middle of the night as a punishable offense, a tired woman falling asleep in the wrong chair, had become something neither of them would ever be able to fully explain to someone else. Not because it didn't make sense, but because it made a kind of sense that only exists in the specific middle space between two people who have been stripped, one careful layer at a time, of every defense they had. He would start therapy the following week. He would not find it easy. He would come home from the first session and reorganize the entire spice cabinet, which Lena would discover when she came to cook dinner and would not mention, because she was learning him, and learning him meant knowing which things required comment and which things required only patience. She would move in 3 months later into a room that was hers, with her things arranged her way, and he would not touch anything in that room without her permission, which cost him more than anything he had done in years, and which was also, she told him, one of the reasons she stayed. Rosa came for dinner the following spring. She wore her good dress and sat at the table that was always at precisely the correct angle and ate the meal that Adrian had asked Lena to cook because he could not cook and had decided that honesty included not pretending otherwise. And she told 3 stories about Lena as a child that were designed to be embarrassing and succeeded. Adrian listened to all 3 with an expression on his face that Lena had never seen before. Something unguarded, something warm, something that looked a great deal like belonging. Rosa, leaving, caught Lena in the hallway. "He looks at you," she said, "like you're the one fixed point in a room that keeps moving." "I know," Lena said. "That's a lot of responsibility." "I know that too." Rosa looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "You're doing well." And she kissed her on the forehead, which meant everything. Lena stood in the hallway of the penthouse on the 32nd floor of a building with no name and listened to her grandmother take the elevator down, and behind her she could hear Adrian in the kitchen, going through his end-of-evening routine. The check, then the recheck, then the third check. 1, 2, 3, and then a pause, and she waited for the fourth one, the one she had started to think of as the one for her, the extra one he always did when she was there, as if he was checking one more time that everything he cared about was still where he'd left it. 1, 2, 3, and then softly a fourth. She went back into the kitchen. He was standing at the counter, and he turned when she came in, and the look on his face was the same one Rosa had just described. Fixed point, still room, and she thought, this is what it looks like when control becomes something other than fear. When order becomes something you build together instead of something you impose alone. It was not a perfect story. It would not have a perfect ending. There was too much history in him, too many locked rooms she hadn't opened yet, too many nights ahead where the systems would grind against the softness and she would have to decide again whether the cost was worth it. Those nights would come. But tonight the city was spread below them like a map of everywhere they'd been, and he had made coffee at exactly the right temperature, and he held his cup out to her without being asked, and she took it, and that, for now, was enough. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story.